Analyzing Tony Manzoni's Lost Fundamental Swing Method, episode 884.
This is Golf Smarter.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Justin.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks for the invite again to talk about Mr.
Oh, it's
Tony
great to have you back
Manzoni.
Well, you know, it's interesting because you and I have been, since the first time you were on the podcast, we've talked a lot about Tony and actually what you've learned from him, because you're the type of instructor that likes to absorb what all the other instructors are talking about and incorporate it into the way you teach golf. And I think that's really amazing. And I truly appreciate, thank you for using Golf Smarter as one of your resources.
Thanks, Fred. I think a lot needs to be said about golf instruction, right? There is no one way. Jack Nicklaus didn't write golf the way, but he wrote it my way. He called it Golf My Way. Similarly, Mr. Ben Hogan wrote the 5 lessons. I like to think that he wrote the 5 lessons more of as a reminder of what he did in his golf swing and not what you should do. Certainly, it provided a framework, a roadmap, if you will, for budding golfers looking to improve their technique. But I'm sure a lot of these top golfers / instructors never meant it to be prescriptive. Now, as a golf instructor, you see golfers of all shapes and sizes. Even if they were of the same physical dimensions, everyone thinks differently. And therefore, as an instructor, you need to accommodate for all these nuances in physical build and cognition, mental cognition. And Golf Smarter has helped me a lot in the sense that it pulled together all these great instructors from around the world. And as an instructor, all I can do is to learn the various delivery methods. I think most of us are saying more or less the same thing, right? Things like a flat left wrist, things like proper weight shift, setup. But the key thing is this. All of us are saying it in a different manner. Now, how I describe a proper grip and how you describe a proper grip may be entirely different. My method may resonate with one player, yours would resonate with another. Now, as an instructor, if you only have one way of doing things and it doesn't sit well with a student, then what happens? You can't just force the student to do it harder or do it more and somehow hope that he gets it. Everyone learns differently. I just cannot emphasize that point more.
Well, also the fact that Golf My Way, not Golf the Way, and also Ben Hogan's book were written a long time ago, and so much has changed, not just in instruction, but the equipment has changed, the balls have changed, the way courses are maintained is radically different than, if you look at old videos of even when Arnold Palmer was playing, you'll see the greens are not as, pristine like tile floors as they are today.
Yes, that's correct. So while agronomy has improved a lot, while teaching, the tools we use to teach golf have changed dramatically. The clubs that we've used to play has changed dramatically, especially the ball. I think a lot of instruction has relatively stayed unchanged. Let me explain. A lot of people say that there's this saying, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Now, one non-negotiable from way back in time is this. If you land the club in front of the ball, you will hit the ball and then take a divot. That is non-negotiable. That's never going to change in the next 100 years. All the top players did that. And they did it in a manner that was, they achieved that while moving their body in a manner that was comfortable to them, that was in line with how their bodies were made. If that makes sense at all. So if you look at Ben Hogan, you look at Jack Nicklaus, you look at Arnold Palmer, all great ball strikers, all great players, all multiple major winners. All of them did it differently. But the one thing that they did similarly was they struck the ball first. Ball and then turf. That doesn't change. Now, Tony wrote a great book. He passed away October 2018, almost 5 years now. He wrote this book that was based on Ben Hogan's secret letter. So apparently someone came in through his door, one of his golfers on the golf course that he was teaching at, came in through the door and said, "Hey, Tony, I've got this letter from Ben Hogan." And it was a letter from Mr. Hogan explaining how he hit his driver. And up till then, no one really had that sort of information from Mr. Hogan. Now, as Tony watched the video and read the letter, he realized this thing, that Mr. Hogan shifted his center of gravity to the left prior to the completion of his backswing. He had to rewatch that over and over again. So, modern technology today has confirmed that, hey, all the players, elite tour players, elite amateurs, all of them get their center of pressure left as soon as possible. A lot of elite players actually say that once they get their shaft parallel to the ground on the backswing, they feel like they're beginning to start their downswing. And Terry Hashimoto, the founder of Body Track, a pressure plate, a pressure mat tool to see where your center of pressure shifts on the golf swing. He's confirmed that also with the pressure tracers. So that's the amazing thing. Although technology has clearly evolved, what the human body has done, is doing, hasn't really changed. Technology is just confirming that. So I wouldn't.
Well, then,
The
I'm
irony
sorry, go
of
ahead.
the irony of Tony's video and book, Lost Fundamental, maybe it should be called. I don't think it was lost at all.
Yeah, well, we're talking about Tony Manzoni, and the reason we're talking about Tony Manzoni is because, as Justin said, he passed away in 2018, and he was a regular on Golf Smarter for many, many years. And over the time that he was on 12 or 13 times, I would get letters every single time. I'd get emails every single time of people saying, this guy is figured it out. I don't know what it is, but he's singing to me. He's like, it's like being at one of those concerts and he was looking directly at me. The way Tony was able to explain what he was doing and how he was teaching really resonated with so many listeners in the Golf Smarter community that since he passed, we've started running those episodes again. And when I like to do it is to open each season, I guess, the golf season really kind of starts picking up in March and April. So all during March and April, I take all of those episodes and I run them one week after the other, and we run them on Golf Smarter Mulligans. And so when Justin had talked to me and told me how much he appreciated what Tony was teaching, I thought, what a perfect thing to do is let's kick off the next Tony Manzoni season with some praise on his instruction and maybe even a little bit of insights onto what he was saying. So with all of that explanation, I also want to say that when we talked about Ben Hogan, his stature, his size, his body was very different than so many amateur golfers. And so even though what he was doing, it was about getting the club, hitting the ball, then hitting the ground, right? Having the bottom of your swing in front of the ball, which is a revelation for so many golfers.
Indeed. So instead of Tony should have called his book The Timeless Fundamentals instead of The Lost Fundamentals, because I don't think it was lost at all. And a lot of comparisons have been made between Ben Hogan and, for example, Stack and Till, Golfing Machine, Morad. I think there are samenesses and differences. The samenesses are that all of them pivot around a single axis, which is the left hip. But how they do it, all of them have some differences to their method. But the beauty of moving around a single pivot axis is this. It prevents you from making massive weight shifts, massive movements of the body and the head, and allows your contact point. The contact point is basically where the club lands, makes contact in relation to the ball on the ground. It allows it to stay in front of the ball. Now, this was very different in the times of Mr. Hogan, where the predominant teaching method was to make a massive shift to the right and then make a massive shift to the left. As you can imagine, as you start trying to shift your weight right and left and you don't do it correctly, you're going to move the base of your neck off the ball, and then you're going to try to move it back on the ball all in a matter of 1+ second while swinging a heavy club. I don't think you get very consistent results with that. So Tony's love fundamental, if you will, helped a lot of people in the sense that when you set up with your weight 60-40 on the left and it progresses to 70-30 on the top of the swing, you suddenly take one side of the body out of play. You're just shifting around like a door around a fixed axis at the door jam. Nothing else moves. So the less moving parts, the less can go wrong. Now, when people
Excellent.
start hitting the ball first before hitting the ground, it's going to increase the enjoyment of the game. It's going to create a sense of, hey, you know what? I'm actually quite talented. Let me start practicing other areas of my game. Or let's try the last fundamental on the short game, which is Tony's big thing. Tony was always, let's get you doing the shorter, slower swings correct before you progress. Let's talk a little bit about Tony's approach to teaching. Tony.
All right, we're gonna do Tony's approach to teaching, but you know what I've got to do. We got to take a time out. We'll be right back. All right, Justin, and just to make sure that people understand that you're in Singapore.
Yes, I am.
And a Golf Smarter listener and an instructor there at a country club in Singapore, correct?
Yes, I'm based out of the Tanah Merah Country Club.
Tanah Merah. All right, I want to go back to getting more deeply into the 60-40 concept. Can you explain it a little bit more so that we really understand what it meant?
Yeah, so Tony always wanted students to set up with more weight on the left leg or the knee side for left-handed golfers. And the whole idea was to rotate around the left hip socket. Now, if you did that correctly, you're going to feel that the right side of your body is very light. You're not going to put any pressure on your right foot. The base of your neck is not going to shift over the right knee. Now, that's absolutely key to hitting consistent shots for most golfers. Certainly, a lot of golfers will take videos, pictures of top professionals and say, hey, look, this guy shifted his head way to the right. Well, yes, he did. It's undeniable that XYZ golfer actually shifted their pressure to the right side. But you got to understand their background. They've been doing this since they were 5 years old, and they've been doing it every day. So that level of coordination that they've trained in their body started at a very young age for a very long time. You picked up golf in your late 40s or 30s, as the case may be, it's not going to happen. Your path is very different from the golfer. So there are always exceptions. So there will be some golfers who say, hey, I tried Tony's method, didn't work for me. Again, there will be exceptions. And Tony never said, you do this, you're going to be a scratch golfer. But what I'll say is this. Tony had a very exceptional track record as a college coach. I believe he taught for 29 years at the College of the Desert, and he walked away with 5 state community championships and 28 other titles, conference titles, I believe.
Yeah, they won the conference championship 28
Yeah,
out of his
28
29
times.
years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So this method, I hesitate to use method. This system that Tony was teaching, as we will get into shortly, produced results over a long period of time. This wasn't a get rich quick scheme or lose 50 pounds overnight type scheme. It stood the it stood the test of time. And as we mentioned earlier in the episode, modern technology has confirmed whatever Tony is teaching from Mr. Ben Hogan's love letters. So a lot needs to be said about that. So while Tony taught this system, he also wanted you to have your own signature about it. If you look at Tony's teachings on the DVD as well as the book that's available on Amazon, he was never prescriptive about most other things in the golf swing. He certainly didn't prescribe a particular grip. He didn't prescribe a particular look about his swing. It was all about principles. He was happy to let you use your own grip, whatever that felt, whatever felt comfortable to you. So if you are a golfer that is predisposed to having a strong grip, underhanded grip, then just need to know that your backswing is going to be flatter than a guy who has a more on-top grip. And consequently, there will be slight differences in the look of your swing and also in the pressure you put in the ground as the result of your grip, but the principle stays the same. So the principles are this. Set up with your weight 60-40 on your left side. Now, the next thing you want to think about is this. If for the listeners that are listening to this, let's just put our hands around our body as though we were hugging ourselves and just make a turn to your right while keeping your right side light. So as you turn to your right side, you want to feel that your weight increases in the proportion of 70 to the left and 30 to the right. Now, as you do that, you will feel that the base of the neck doesn't really shift this way. It doesn't shift to the right. So if it doesn't shift to the right, you don't have to bring it back to the left. And you also notice that your shoulder turn is not as big as you would think it's necessary. It's certainly not 90 degrees or 100 degrees or 120 degrees as the case may be. Now, we're going to take our hands off our chest. Now we're just going to put our left arm across the chest. Now this is the key thing. This is the backswing that Tony taught. Once you're in your setup, as you take your backswing while keeping your right side light, you just want to fold your left arm across your chest. That creates a connection between the left upper arm and the left pectoral muscle. Now, as you do that, notice that your left thumb is more or less pointing up. That tells us that the face didn't fan open and it didn't close on the backswing. So the cup face is basically controlled by the inclination of the torso and the rotation of it. As you take a golf club and make your swing, you'll see that the blade should stay fairly square. That tells us if all you do on the downswing and do not disrupt the inclination of the cup face in relation to your torso, you're probably going to get a pretty square face at impact. So these are, again, principles. Now, what was Hogan's secret? Everyone said that he had a secret cup left wrist, but this is the secret as interpreted by Tony. Mr. Hogan's tailbone went to the left of the target just prior to the completion of his backswing. That was the move. That is the move that's going to move your center of gravity, your weight distribution, 60-40 at setup, 70-30 on the backswing. And at impact, you want to have 80% of your weight on the left side, 20% on the right side. As you finish, it's going to be 90-10. So
Wow.
as listeners incorporate this secret into their game, into their swing, they will notice that the contact point where the club makes contact with the ground will more often than not be ahead of the ball. You're gonna create a what I call a hit and run accident with the club face against the golf ball. You will hit the ball first and then a divot. You will automatically have a flat left wrist at impact. You will automatically have shaft lean at impact. This is critical. A lot of golfers take an 8-iron, they add loft to it, they increase shaft lean. Sorry, they decrease shaft lean to the right side. The 8-iron becomes a pitching wedge. Mr. Hogan took an 8-iron, he increased shaft lean towards the target. His 8-iron became a 7-iron. Now think about this, right? When you start leaning the shaft forward, the sweet spot, the fifth or sixth line of the club face, start to make contact with the ball. You lean the shaft backwards, you're going to make contact on the first and second groove of the golf club. This is why Mr. Hogan and tour pros, elite amateurs, their ball flight takes on a totally different trajectory from the average golfer. Just sweet spot contact, just physics. So if you start doing the lost fundamental, you're going to experience this more and more. Now, don't get excited and say, hey, let's go out, get me a small bucket of balls, take a 6-iron, start doing that. Doesn't work that way. So how do we do it? Again, Tony was a big advocate of starting small. He would first get you to do the lost fundamental while chipping. So he advocated the chip and run putting with loft style, advocated using 9, 8, 7, and 6 iron from around the green. Now, again, set up in the same manner, 60-40 bias to the left. Grip down on the, call it an 8-iron, 9-iron. Stand the shaft up, as was common in those days. Again, coming back in vogue on tour. As you stand the shaft up, you will find that if the sole on the toe end of the club that makes contact with the ground, you get a very tiny footprint as opposed to putting the entire club on the ground. Let me just get a club here for you.
No, this is one of my secret weapons that I talk about a lot. Is how Tony taught me to bring the shaft more upright, and have the toe down.
Correct.
When you're chipping, just to get the ball onto the green and rolling.
Yeah. So look at this, right? This is the entire sole against the ground. Now, if you stand it up, the very tiny footprint. It's very hard to stop the chip shot from there.
Right.
And when you do that, you're going to make contact with the toe side of the club face. You minimize backspin. It produces a very predictable roll of the ball. That's one of the main issues with amateurs when they start chipping. They get too much shaft lean. They create too much ball speed. So your ball speed and your ball spin, what I say, they do not match. You get a very unpredictable outcome. So,
all right, listen, another timeout, and then I want to come back and talk a little bit more about what most of us do as recreational amateur players, how we approach chipping onto the green and how we're approaching it wrong. But we're going to do that after this. Again, we're just reliving the lessons of Tony Manzoni with Justin Tang, who was introduced to Tony Manzoni by Golf Smarter. I mean, it's not like you ever had a chance to meet him. You only got to hear him in the show, but you read his book, you've watched his video. This idea of chipping up onto the green with a 7, 8, 9 iron by bringing the shaft more upright instead of leaning it back, and being up on the toe of the club. The point of this, and I think that a lot of people try to fly the ball as close to the hole as they can and hope it stops, but they don't know how to do that. and most instructors that I've spoken to about chipping onto the green is you want to use as much as the putting surface as you possibly can. You want to get the ball onto the green as quickly as you can, but you may not necessarily want to putt from off the green because that rough, whether it's the first or second cut that you're putting over, is pretty unpredictable. You may not know, what you're going to get. So you want to get the ball just slightly over that, get onto the green as soon as possible, and let it roll as long as you can. Now, the longer the lower the club number. So if a 7-iron is going to roll a lot longer than a 9 or a pitching wedge because of the loft of the club, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I've interpreted this properly.
Yes, you have. The short game is really interesting, right? This is what I tell most of my players. The information that's in the short game is at least 3 times that of the long game.
Wow.
And another saying that I have to my players is, let's get it high off the tee and low around the green.
That's great.
So low around the greens, we always start, can I putt it? If I can't, can I chip and run it? If I can't, I've got to pitch it. And your lob wedge, your flop shot, that's really only for emergency purposes. It's a shot of last resort. Short game is where you get to express yourself, your creativity. I teach and use all sorts of grips. But there are 3 different heights to grip the club depending on the required shot at hand. So chipping the way that Tony teaches basically takes a lot of guesswork. So you talked about different carry and roll proportions. Generally, I like to teach it this way. I use the pitching wedge, the 8-iron and 6-iron. Depending on the course conditions, we're talking about 50% carry and roll, 1/3, and then 1/4. So for example, if I'm faced with a downhill chip that normally requires my 8-iron, probably take out the pitching wedge. The key thing is I grip all of them around the same height. Rule of thumb is this: the 7-iron is where you grip right to the end of the shaft. That approximates the putter height. It gives you more or less the same feel as your putter. You want things to stay more or less consistent. And because you're using a chip and run, the stroke is very, very small. The smaller the stroke, the less can go on. And because it's so slow.
Is it more like a putting stroke?
Yeah,
than an actual swing?
That's correct. The great Raymond Floyd called it putting with loft.
Putting with loft?
Yeah. So you just set up with the shot as though you're going to make a putt. The only difference is this: you want to lean the shaft a little bit more forward and just make a putting stroke. Try to get contact on the toe of the club. You'd be surprised with how effective this shot can be. So when you're making a chip and run stroke in the manner that Tony taught, it's going to be really slow. Now, when it's slow, here's the magic. When it's slow, you're able to feel the loft fundamental working for you. That's the thing, right? Everyone conceptually gets the idea of the loft fundamental. They think because I know it, I can execute it. That's as far from the truth as it gets. Now think about this. I'm right-handed. I certainly know how to write A to Z, the 26th alphabet. But that does not mean I can immediately pick up a pen with my left hand and write it at the same speed of my right hand. It just doesn't work that way. There is a process that your brain and your body has to go through. It's creating a habit, essentially, before you can execute the various motor movement patterns at more or less the same speed as your dominant hand. Now, if it took me, I'm 43 this year, it took me 43 years to reach a certain proficiency of a certain task, it's not going to take me just 6 months of hard work on my non-dominant side to reach that same level of proficiency. So once you have felt the lost fundamental and you can execute it at a fairly good speed with your chipping stroke, then Tony would want you to move on to the pitch shot. So again, nothing else changes. 60-40 on the left. The only difference is you're going to use a 56 or 54 degrees. Now, you are able to move your left arm so that it's parallel to the ground on the backswing. Now, as you do that, you're going to incorporate a little bit more of the weight shift that we talked about and get your center of gravity moving so that your weight distribution ends up 70-30 on the left side. Again, the speed and the length of the pitch shot is considerably lower than that of the full swing. As you work through it and feel the lost fundamental, which again is simply shifting your center of gravity to the left prior to the completion of your backswing, you have a better chance of progressing this move when you try to make a full swing with first a 7-iron and then perhaps with a driver or a 3-wood.
Tony was, I don't want to say obsessed with, but he spent so much time studying and analyzing everything he could about Ben Hogan and his swing because he just loved. I think he even got to see Ben Hogan play once,
Wow.
probably more than once. And he, there's so many times that I've talked to instructors who said, I've figured out Ben Hogan's secret, and everyone had a different interpretation.
Yeah, everyone
But Tony
certainly had
seemed to be onto something.
Yes, I would say Tony is one of the few instructors that saw Mr. Hogan make that shift to the left. But here's the interesting bit, right? We mentioned earlier about the other greats. While Mr. Hogan had a secret, my interpretation, besides this center of gravity move, was that he knew his swing, he knew the various components, he matched them up to make it his swing. I think that was his genius. I see too many good golfers these days. They go like, oh, I want to copy this guy, Adam Scott swing, I want to copy Tiger Woods swing. But hey, you're built like Ian Woosnam. Why are you trying to copy, say, a Davis Love type of swing? It just doesn't make sense. So if you're 6'4", I think you shouldn't copy the look of Ben Hogan's swing. That's why I tell students, I can help you hit it like Ben Hogan. I may not be able to make you look like Ben Hogan. There's a dramatic distinction there. So I can help you hit a power fade.
Yeah. Tell me exactly that difference. Go into detail on that when you talk about there's a dramatic difference there.
So Mr. Hogan, how he hit the ball. Very strong trajectory, power fade, right? Hit the ball before he hit the turf. I can help you do those things. But if you want your swing to look like Ben Hogan's, I may not be able to do that for you. A good starting point is this. If you're built like a Davis Love and you try to swing like a Ben Hogan, it's not going to look like Ben Hogan at all. From the videos that I've analyzed, it looks like Mr. Hogan's arms were his wingspan. If he were to stand in a crucifix position and you measured him from fingertip to fingertip, it looks like it's more or less the same as his height. Now, if you're a guy like me who's got arms like an 8, very long arms, it's not going to look the same. At the top of my backswing, my arms are going to be further behind me than Mr. Hogan. That means I've got to get them out in front again, so I've got that extra move to make. Now, if my instructor doesn't teach me to make that extra move, or physically I'm unable to do it, or coordinate it mentally, I'm not going to be able to play decent golf, because I'm not swinging according to my DNA. Everyone has a particular DNA. How you rotate on your backswing, which side you favor, whether your head moves right or left, or up and down. All these are predispositions. How you grip the club, all these are predispositions. You do a simple test like this, you can see my thumb goes above the right shoulder. I've got some students who are here. That tells you where your arms should be, what kind of plane you should be using on your backswing, whether it's a high track above the right shoulder, medium track at the right shoulder, or low track. And your transitions all are determined by your anatomical proportion in relation to one body part to another. You got a longer torso versus a shorter torso. How you look like when you address the ball, forward flexion, is all going to look different. For me, for example, if I'm not mindful of my longer arms and I go to the golf shop and just pick a set of clubs off the rack, off the shelf, I'm not going to play good golf. I need shorter clubs. So guys with longer arms, guys with shorter arms, you need longer clubs and flatter lies. The way I explain it, it sounds logical, but a lot of people don't think like that. And there are things that.
All right, we're gonna take another timeout.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to take our last timeout. I want to come back and start talking about
the full swing.
Just picking up right where you left off. Yeah, the full swing. We'll be right back. One of the things that Tony really impressed upon me over and over again was keeping your arm attached to your left, for a right-handed golfer, to your left pec, or your left tit, as he would say, to keep it connected as
Yes.
you're making your swing.
Correct.
As you're making your full swing.
So when you make the golf swing, think about it as an integrated motion. Like all other sports. You don't hear a separation of arms and body. You don't hear this arm-body debate in other sports. It's not even a thing. It's only in golf, right? Where, oh, no, I feel like I'm swinging more of the arms. But you know what? You're swinging it with your entire body. If you throw a javelin, you're not going to just use your arms and throw the implement. The javelin's not going to go very far. So think about this as an integrated motion. But at the same time, instruction must be relative to what you feel. So if a student came to me and he presents a certain motion, I might tell the student, hey, you know what, just feel that you're using all arms or all body, as the case may be, based on what I'm seeing him do in person. So we talk about keeping the left arm across the chest. That simply allows the body to look in an integrated manner. A lot of beginner golfers, they certainly just use the arms just to motivate the club hit. Now, pardon me, golf swing is not about swinging the club hit. The golf swing is about swinging the entire club. If you think of swinging just the club hit, your left wrist is going to bend like this. Going to bend like this, you start adding loft. But if you think of swinging the entire club, now the left arm stays connected to the chest. How important is this? When you're arm wrestling, right? If you're just using the rotation of your upper arm, your shoulder socket, you're going to lose a lot of arm wrestling matches. But if you use your so-called body weight, you're going to win more than your fair share of arm wrestling matches. So it's the same. Excuse me. It's the same principle, right, of keeping the left arm across the chest. And it also maintains a square club face. There is no independent articulation of the elbow joint, no excessive left arm supination or extension of the left wrist where you cup it, flip the club. None of that. And when you do that, the whole thing actually feels much slower than you think it should be. Now, when you have the left arm across the chest and you make one golf swing, call it, while your arm and your body are making one revolution, because of the law of the lever, you've got a very long lever now, left arm straight in line with the club shaft. The speed, the miles per hour at the end of the hit is higher than if you had bent your lever. So while you feel slower, the speed is actually much higher because of the unbroken lever. A lot of people go like, doesn't feel right. I say, hey, give this a shot. And then when they do it correctly, they go like, hey, I'm actually hitting the ball the same distance, if not further, with the same effort. And say, hey, golf becomes much easier that way. Well, just because you're using the club in the way that the manufacturer intended it to be used. Is there a place for flipping? Yes, around the green. Flop shot, bunker shots. But these are the only places where you actually want a cut left wrist at impact or extended left wrist at impact. So there is a time and place for everything. It takes wisdom to know when to use these things. Everything is permissible, but is it the time for it?
Right. A lot of people will compare stack and tilt to what Tony did. What would you, how do you compare the two, and what would you say to people about that? It's just like stack and tilt the way Tony did it.
So again, the samenesses of this, right? They encourage a golf swing that's based on one axis. That's where the differences end. So Tony / Mr. Hogan encouraged a more forward flexion of the torso at setup and on the backswing. Stack and tilt is a little bit different. They encourage more extension of the upper torso on the backswing. So when you look at these two, when you look at two golfers, one doing a lost fundamental, one doing stack and tilt, you will see that from face on, the stack and tilt golfer will have the left side of his body more in a straight line, whereas the Ben Hogan will have his spine tilted slightly more to the right side. So that's the
away from the target.
Away from the target. And again, you can see this on the PDF that you're going to spend on.
Yeah.
But all of them. Yeah, so again, these are the main differences. But depending on your build, how you see and perceive certain things in the golf swing, if stack and tilt works for you and helps you get a flat left wrist and get your contact point in front of the ball, great. I think a lot needs to be said about adapting various systems to suit yourself. I certainly don't want to demonize any methods or single and say, hey, this is the only way or this is not the way. Because for every 10 golfers that says, hey, stack and tilt doesn't work for me, I can show you another 10 guys that stack and tilt work for. Right. You show me 5 guys who say, I got hurt playing stack and tilt. I'll show you 5 physiotherapists who will say, this is the best thing for bad backs. Any method will injure you if you don't do it correctly.
Well said. I frequently will get emails from people saying, so you've had, so many different people on, what method do you use? And it's like, all of them? It's like I don't incorporate, I take bits and pieces of everything and that I learn and everyone that I talk to. And some I incorporate more than others, and some I'll try it. And if it's not working, I'll not use it anymore. Doesn't mean that it's not right. And that's part of my position here on the show, is that I'm not a PGA professional, so I'm not here to judge whether what this person wants to teach is correct or incorrect. What I want to do is put it out there, let the audience absorb it, and use it or not use it, decide for themselves if it's valid or not valid. And if you don't like it, come back next week. You're going to probably hear something completely different.
Yeah, that's just a saying in dating, right? He is Mr. Right, just not right now. So I think a lot of concepts that you see discussed in golf media, they are right, but are they right for you? Again, It's not so much about whether it's correct. It's relative. Does it resonate with you? That's the thing. I discussed this with some other instructors before. I said there's only one non-negotiable in the golf swing that every one of us can agree upon. It's not how you set up. Because if you look at setups and you spectrum it, some guys aim way right, some guys aim way left, some have a very weak grip, some have a very strong grip. Backswings, again, another area where the ton of spectruming can be done. You got a Matt Wolf backswing, and then on the other end, you've got a Ricky Fowler backswing. Impact's another area where there's a lot of spectruming. You got guys up on their toes, guys like Dustin Johnson, more squatted, more rotated, bent right arm, Joaquin Neiman, Mito Pereira, and then you got on the other end, you got guys who like Brian Gay, fully extended, Ben Curtis, fully extended. So lots of spectruming at P7 impact. But one thing that all these guys can agree upon is they're trying to get the club head to land slightly in front of the ball so that we hit ball and then turn. That is non-negotiable. So what I do with students is generally this. Let's try to make a sound in front of the ball using the club head. Now, how you do that, what you look like when you do that is going to be different from the guy in the next bay. But the key thing is this, all of you are hitting the ball first and then taking a dillard. And then from there, now we've got a pretty decent canvas to work around. Then we start optimizing certain things. Is your grip suitable for you? We put them through a battery of tests. Is the ground forces that you use compatible with your grip, for example? Is your anchoring, are all these things compatible? And then we start this journey towards optimizing your golf swing. But we never lose sight of the non-negotiable. Loft fundamentals could be one of the systems that I use. The stack and tilt could also be one of the systems I use. The right-sided swing could also be one of the systems I use. But I never lose sight that these are merely delivery methods of helping me get the student create the non-negotiable. Now, when I am able to do this with students, they are what I call swinging according to their DNA. And when you swing according to your DNA, it's very difficult to forget on the first tee. Now, if you're predisposed to making a little shift to the right and suddenly I say you got to go stack and tilt, or vice versa, on the first tee, you're going to be confused. But if you swung according to your DNA and say, hey, ball to the target, and then I need to get ball to the target, I need the club head to make a sound in front of the ball. How difficult is that? Just take an implement. After this, Fred, just take a stick and make a sound against the carpet. You will see that your body will self-organize and do whatever is necessary to carry out the intention. Not difficult. Just don't think of the golf club as a golf club, because when you do that, you suddenly have a lot of preconceived ideas about what you should do with the club. But instead, just look at it as a stick. Make a sound against the ground. If your right arm straightens, so be it. If you have to do it with more rotation of the torso, so be it. But let's get that non-negotiable going first. And then we can start optimizing the other components of the golf swing.
Excellent. Excellent advice. Well, again, Justin has put together a really nice PDF that honors Tony Manzoni, but it also goes deep into what he's learned from Tony, and also comparing it to stack and tilt that he's been teaching for quite a while. And I am going to put this all on this PDF. I'll make this available on the blog post at golfsmarter.com for this episode. And also, we'll make sure to remind everybody that Tony's book is available on Amazon. We've been able to get it republished, and it's available on Kindle format as well. It's called The Lost Fundamental, One Simple Move, Better Golf Forever. And If you're interested in the DVD that he created, that's no longer in print as well, but here at Golf Smarter is the only place you're going to be able to find it. We have a link for it on a private YouTube channel that we can get it out to you as well. So we really look forward to having all of you reach out and start listening to Golf Smarter Mulligans, and you'll hear Tony Manzoni. You'll get, if you have not heard him before, you're going to understand what we're talking about. And if you have, you're going to be glad you're listening to it again, because you always find a new nugget whenever you're listening to Tony. Justin, thanks so much for your time, your patience, and your energy in putting this together.
Thanks, Fred.